Oh, right, on the screen.
You've been on your noise for a long time. Okay. Welcome everyone here today. I'll declare the briefing session open at 4 o'clock. Disclaimer, agenda briefing sessions are used to inform councillors on the items of business to be presented and discussed at the forthcoming Ordinary Council meeting. These meetings are open to members of the public who may request to present a deputation to council relating to an item on the agenda. No decisions are made at these meetings, although councillors can request additional information or alternative wording be provided to allow for motions to be prepared for consideration at the forthcoming Ordinary Council meeting. Any statement regarding any planning or development application made during an agenda briefing session is not to be taken as notice of approval. Anyone who has an application lodged with the Shire must obtain and should only rely on written confirmation of the outcomes of the application and any conditions attached to the decision made by Council. An audio and visual record will be made by means of live streaming of these proceedings and uploaded to the Shire's YouTube page for viewing. Acknowledgement of country. The Shire of Harvey acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. And we pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their cultures and to elders both past, present and emerging. Item 2, record of apologies and leave of absence. Of apologies from Councillor Cavoni, Councillor Jackson and Councillor Crispin. Item 3, declarations of members and officers' personal interest. Councillor Campbell. Thanks,
Mr. President, and I apologise for not putting this through earlier. I have an impartiality interest in item 5.5.2, the Australia Day Awards. I declare that I know some of the nominees and that I actually submitted one nomination for consideration, but I'll stay in the chambers for the duration of this item.
Okay. And Councillor Dickinson in the same.
Yes, thank you. I submitted my declaration of interest, and yes, some of the nominees are known to me, so I will stay in chambers and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Councillor Coleman also declared impartiality interest in item 5.5.2 Australia Day Awards, and she will also stay in chambers and deal with it on its merits. Councillor Beach declared impartiality interest in item 5.3.6 Harvey Men's Shed. Councillor Beach declared that he is the Secretary of the Harvey Men's Shed Incorporated and has declared that he would deal with the matter on its merits and stay in the chamber for the duration of the item. And also an impartiality interest in item 5.5.2 Australia Day Awards, and will also stay in the chamber and vote on its merits.
Can I just have an amendment to that?
Yes,
Mr. President, if you don't mind. It says there submitted one of the nominations, which I did, but I did it on behalf of the Australia Day Breakfast Committee. It's not my nomination.
Okay. Councillor Lovett.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I also declare an interest in 5.5.2, as some of the nominees are known to me also?
Okay. Any others? Councillor Caprica.
Sorry for not putting this in earlier, but I need to declare impartiality to item 5.3.3. I'm chairperson of the Harvey Main Street, and we have had some input into the design of some of the billboards.
Okay. Councillor Brolin.
Yeah, I've got to declare an interest in 5.5.2 as well, as I one of the nominees. And I'll stay in the chamber and take those merits. Yeah.
Councillor Burgoyne, did you have any interest to declare?
No, I didn't know. I know of some of the nominees, but I don't have I'm not sort of what I would call a close relationship with any of them. So.
All good, welcome. Councillor Boylan.
Thank you.
No, I'm all good, thanks. Same as Councillor Burgoyne.
Okay, welcome to the meeting also. Okay, item 4, deputations. Ms. Canella Hope, deputation on item 5.3.1. Welcome, Canella.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. As indicated, I'm here to talk about the matter concerning the Harvey Springs estate. I think this is probably maybe the third time that I've presented to this group, and it's probably been about 2 years now, I think, since my client Tony began dialogue with Shire officers about this opportunity. Both Tony and I have been in continual contact with Shire officers through this scheme amendment process, particularly since advertising completed, and it did come as a bit of a surprise, I have to say, to see the recommendation not to support. Tony is away and he wasn't able to come. He sends his apologies, but he did ask that I express his frustration about that. This amendment, it's been carefully crafted, including with the guidance of officers, but also with the Department of Planning officers as well. The additional uses that are proposed, it simply sets up the ability to consider a range of uses that are presently not contemplated under the zone. That's all that it does. It doesn't approve any of the uses that are set out. It simply opens the door for more detailed design to be invested in, and then a usual process of local development plan, but particularly a development application to be lodged and considered. We've known from the beginning that wastewater in particular is going to be a key determinant of the type of use that might eventuate here, but also a potential mix of uses as well. And Tony understands that very well, but he's not prepared to make that investment until he knows that an application can be lodged. And that's simply what this scheme amendment is about. As you're all no doubt aware, it's typical of development applications to turn on this question of how much wastewater can be accommodated and the type of system that needs to be put in place. The report before you, it probably had me scratching my head a little bit because it seems quite favourable and in support of this scheme amendment, and then the issues that are flagged are dealt with in attachment 3, which sets out some alternative modifications to the scheme amendment. Tony agrees with all of those modifications. So aside from that, I suppose I'm not quite clear on exactly what the key concerns are, but if it is wastewater, as I said, more testing is going to happen as a matter of course, and any system proposed has to fit for the intended use. The Department of Water position on no brewery or winery manufacturing in farming areas, it's a pretty broad brush statement from one officer, and perhaps it's one for the Shire to also take some issue with as well, particularly in context of your own economic development and tourism strategy. No doubt, I would say there are some poor examples out there, perhaps of businesses that have evolved over time and they've got to play catch up. You know, they might have just happened on a subject land without the right wastewater system in place. But I think it's quite unrealistic to extend the sorts of statements that have come from the Department of Water and a potential ban, I think they're alluding to, on all beverage making in farming areas and claiming that the entire industry is problematic. It's just not true. As you know, each proposal has to be assessed on its own merit, and I would say the number of fully compliant businesses in farming areas, it far outweighs these few people that do the wrong thing. I think there's plenty of examples of the types of solutions, and I know when we've presented before we've talked about the types of things that could eventuate here, and I think most likely the wastewater solution is going to do things such as cap the number of people that can be on the site. I think it's also going to cap the volume of wastewater in things like a winery and a brewery, if it were to happen. We don't actually know as yet. We're simply asking to rezone the land so that it could be considered. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I do hope next week when you're making a decision on this matter that you'll recommend in favour and support it, subject to those modifications that are set out in the attachment, which my client fully agrees with. Thank you.
Thanks, Canella. Is there any questions, councillors? Councillor Beach.
Thank you. Mr. Lowe, there's quite a number of residents that have written into us and suggested that Riverdale Road and Thompson Road are not capable of supporting that development. Paraphrasing there. Have you got any comment to make on the road system in that area? And the South Western Highway in particular?
Yeah, sure. Traffic was a key consideration from the start, and I know that Tony, he would tell you, no doubt, if he was here, that he's had concerns previously about Thompson Road, and the traffic investigation that we had carried out as part of this application makes recommendation for upgrade there anyway, regardless of this application, so now. But in terms of this proposal, the traffic assessment sets out levels of threshold of traffic that are suitable Thompson Road and suitable in context if main roads carry through with the improvements they've suggested, but also what the tipping point is to require potentially a secondary access to Riverdale Road, and that's catered for in the concept that's proposed. But yeah, in terms of impact to neighbours from traffic, the access to the subject land at the moment, or the existing winery, even though it's not open, is via Thompson Road, and that's a short distance in, so it doesn't actually go past other people's homes.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Thanks, Canella.
Thank you.
Okay, officers' reports. 5.1, Chief Executive Officer. Item number 5.1.1, CEO Performance Appraisal. Any questions at all with this? If you wish to discuss behind closed doors?
Yeah.
Okay. No, you don't. I'll just hold it to you. Okay. Move on to item 5.2, Infrastructure Services. 5.2.1, Closure of portion of Ridley Street Road Reserve. Any questions on that one, councillors? Item 5.2.2, Proposed traffic calming along a portion of 7th Street, Harvey. Councillor Bromman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I read through this, and Main Roads have said that they won't lower the speed limit in this area. So we've still got 110 kilometres an hour. We're going to put calming in there. And I was wondering, where does the Shire stand if someone has a serious accident by doing 110 and meeting our calming devices in the night time on a motorbike or car?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, look, Cathedral Ave, that's 110, and we've got traffic calming devices there. The signing and line marking was approved by Main Roads to comply with the standards. So with the appropriate signage and line marking, that covers any liability. If someone chooses to ignore the signage, line marking, then they take on that liability, as long as we comply with the signage and line marking requirements, which, you know, obviously each speed cushion will have warning signs leading up to it and signage at the device. Main Roads have also indicated that if we can change the speed environment of that section of road, they may consider lowering the posted speed there. So, yeah, look, they've refused to do it. We're concerned that Harvey Beef have forklifts running along there at 10 kilometres per hour. They have large trucks, semis and whatnot, reversing into those docking zones, which at the moment causes more of a risk and liability than properly designed speed calming, traffic calming devices with proper signage and line marking.
Thank you.
Councillor Capistrano.
Thanks, Mr. President.
Just a question for Mr. Locke. The speed limit on 7th Street, given that Coringa Cup Avenue is 80, and I believe Uduck Road is 90 along that section, so what is the actual speed limit currently on 7th Street in that section?
Yes, it's not signposted, but it's the open road speed limit, which defaults to 110 kilometres per hour.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. Mr. Lockyer has the recommendation here of 50% contribution towards the works by Harvey Beef. Is that a staff recommendation or a suggestion from Harvey Beef? I would like to actually see them contribute more, since this is something that they have initiated.
Yeah, look, it is a staff recommendation. And look, I suppose I was mindful that we are negotiating with Harvey B for the Uduck Road, Government Road and Forestry Road intersection, where we'll be doing a land swap. And the latest proposal for a roundabout that I've flipped off the main roads, and the actual land swap, we'd be taking more land from them than we would be giving them back. Given that they've agreed to no cost in the land swap, I just thought, rather than sloping the full cost of this, maybe we should, as a gesture of goodwill, go 50-50.
Okay.
Councillor Coleman.
Thank you. A bit left field probably, but given that just my observance is that the trucks come in from Uduck Road 99% of the time and come out Uduck Road way, is it viable to create a cut-off, not a cul-de-sac per se, but a cut-off at the other end of where those trucks go in and out, so that residents, there is no through road essentially, instead of calming device?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Look, I did have a discussion with the Shire President on something similar in terms of whether a portion of that road should become a private road and actually not a public road. That discussion hasn't occurred with Harvey Beef. The only discussion we've had is traffic calming. Obviously, as it is a public road all the way to Coringa Cup Avenue, there'd be consultation with residents, because obviously residents that live at the other end who want to head north from Uduck Road, obviously you wouldn't be able to access their properties that way. So obviously there's a process. Anything's possible, but there's a process. But that hasn't been discussed with Harvey Beef. Neither of those options, closing, amalgamating as a private road, or cul-de-sacking, hasn't been discussed.
Sorry, just to follow on, so when we're talking about traffic calming, are we talking about speed humps or something like chicanes? Because a chicane at the other end, instead of closing it off, would have a similar effect as closing it off, would it not?
We're talking about speed cushions for the calming, and so we're not restricting any access on the road. We're just trying to slow the speed. And the reason we're suggesting speed cushions, and I've agreed to them, is that larger vehicles can straddle those when they undertake their deliveries and whatnot. But obviously the passenger vehicles, the ones that are hooning through there, would be slowed down.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.3, sustainable development. 5.3.1, finalisation of a scheme amendment number 129. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Beach.
I don't know whether it's appropriate, but some of the issues that Ms Holt raised, is an opportunity for Mr Hall just to clarify some of those statements that she made, so I can get a clear understanding, because she obviously has a different view than the planning department.
Mr Hall.
Happy to respond through you, Mr Chair. Look, I think where this application is heading in terms of the mixture of uses, the accommodation style, that is consistent almost entirely with where we're going in terms of the proposed planning framework. It is a style of development that we are actually encouraging. And that is actually reflected in the tone of the report, and I do apologise that it came as a surprise to Canella and to Tony. That was never our intention. Having said that though, yes, a lot of the issues that are requiring to be clarified can be and are usually dealt with at the development application stage. But at a development application stage, those land uses are there, we know what they are. At this stage, those land uses aren't capable of being contemplated. So instead of opening the door with that uncertainty, based on the discussions with state agencies, there would be preference to have greater clarity as to the capacity of the site. Yes, it's a scheme amendment document that doesn't actually have that finite figure, but at this stage, consistent with other applications that we've dealt with, getting that consistent, and also not consistent, but getting a greater level of certainty in terms of its overall capacity is a position that we're at the moment. And we feel that there is that lack of certainty at the moment, and that is reflected in the state agency's responses. There is also the fact that we are a referral authority, in this case to Department of Planning, so if that position of requiring that upfront certainty isn't supported, there is that alternative recommendation, or the not alternative recommendation, the schedule of modifications, of which Ms Hope has said that her client is happy with. But achieving that certainty prior to opening the door is what this report is about.
So if I may follow up, please. So if we as council were to support the offer's recommendation, is this dead in the water then?
No, the final decision still needs to be determined by the Department of Planning. So if you notice that we are simply, we're actually advising the West Australian Planning Commission that that is what our recommendation is. That is something they can accept or they can actually overturn.
Yeah, because I am concerned with the development is dovetailing into our overall tourism plan. And
correct, and look, we always knew...
Although that's not a question, I'm sorry.
No, we always knew there's a very ambitious framework going forward, and it's something we are continually going to stand behind, but we also can't throw out proper and orderly planning to make sure that what we're doing can be sustained. And it's probably unfortunate this is one of the first application that we've got, and we may be in a situation that we've got that historic response from state agencies in terms of more certainty up front. So it's a work in progress.
So what does the applicant need to do to get this over the line, or to change the recommendation?
The schedule modification, a lot more environmental reports, a lot more wastewater reports to provide that level of certainty to both the Department of Water and Department of Health, to ensure that basically what is actually being proposed, the scale of what can be proposed, can sustainably be managed within their guidelines on that site. So,
thank you for your indulgence.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.3.2, proposed basic scheme amendment number 130, rezoning, and insert provisions under Schedule 15. Councillor Beach.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As I understand it, this is a report to change the zoning from light industry to recreation to residential. But in the attachments, the rezoning plan shows residential lots and road layouts. So my question is the proponent wishing to develop lot 564 with a housing development after the amendment is supported, remembering that I think some time ago we came out and said no, it's to stay residential, but I'll take that on advice from the planner.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so this particular outcome was the result of a structure plan that was lodged over this parcel of land that the Commission entertained and supported against the Shire's recommendation of refusal. It was the position then, and probably remains the position now, that this land should be preserved for light industrial purposes, not only for sheer demand but also in terms of the consistency with compatible land uses around it. That decision unfortunately was not supported, and the northern portion of this parcel of land is actually now approved by a structure plan for light industrial, for residential development. So this basic amendment is aligning with the decision of the Department of Planning to approve that structure plan. So, and in response, I think, to one of your queries earlier, there's around about 450 houses that are proposed to be developed. There is some substantial earthworks being undertaken on site at the moment that are in response to a bulk earthworks development approval that was granted following that issue of that structure plan.
Thank you.
Councillor Bromwich.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just wondering, Mr. Hall, in the recommendation, is it possible to put in a line at the bottom there that says something along the lines, request staff to investigate with the West Australian Planning Commission to identify industrial land for the Australian area to replace the land taken by this development? Or would that be a motion?
Through Mr Chair, it could be a standalone item that Council wishes to include in the recommendation. There's no harm in asking. I don't know where it's going to land, but if Council remains of the opinion that we still need light industrial land within that area, then there's no reason why we can't extend an invitation to the Department to have some further discussion.
So you'd be amenable to having that in there, or words to that effect?
Between now and next week, we'll have a look at some wording that might address what you're after. Bear in mind that a lot of the site selection process may involve people's freehold land, and so they would need to be supportive of actually allowing that. So happy to have a look at a draft motion for next week.
Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr Hall, I've just got a question surrounding the process for this. So this is being processed as a basic amendment, is that right? So there is no need to do any advertising or the like. So I would have thought that this is quite a significant change from light industrial to residential. So I'm asking why it wouldn't go through as a standard amendment that would need some form of advertising. That's my understanding.
Through Mr Chair, the response we received from the Department of Planning was that it's already gone through an extensive advertising period through the structure plan. So this is purely an administrative process to tidy up that approval with the zoning of the property.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item number 5.3.3, Harvey Region Signage and Infrastructure Style Guide. Any questions there, councillors? Item 5.3.4, Recreation Vehicle Friendly Trial. Councillor Beach.
Thanks, Mr President. In the budget implications, it lists that signage has been identified as a cost, but reading the report and the objections that came in about this, are staff able to estimate the cost of monitoring these locations? And it might include, but not limited to, antisocial behaviour or discarded rubbish, overstaying, servicing the sites, etc.
Through Mr Chair, we've looked at this one quite extensively internally, and I think preferably invite Trish, the author of the report, to respond to that question.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. So we're very aware that we don't have a dedicated budget per se as part of this for the monitoring side of things. In speaking with Hayden from the Rangers perspective, we've had a look at, obviously the Rangers in their ongoing rounds when it comes to illegal parking, littering, those kind of aspects. That's all part of the process that we currently have in place, and you can find a lot of the answers to that, how we deal with that on our website. It doesn't mean we have the manpower, of course, and we are slightly short in that area, and we're coming up to a busy time. Although we don't actually see that if the trial was to be implemented, it would kind of kick off in December, because there's still a bit of work to be done. So a lot of the processes around illegal, like I said, illegal parking, infringements, those sorts of things, we consider would probably be done in the natural course of an officer's day-to-day kind of role, not adding to his role, but responding through, obviously, the reported facility that we have on the website, and also complaints as well. So there'll be a lot of kind of reactive. When it comes to antisocial behaviour, obviously local police tend to be the port of call for that, especially with a lot of the activities up at the dam and whatnot. But we're hoping the demographic that jumps into these RV vans, hopefully aren't that type of demographic. The other thing that I think we need to think about is that we're only talking, unlike Bunbury, who has dedicated an entire back beach to a whole lot of caravans coming on board, we're only talking about 3 sites in Harvey. We're talking, I think it was 4 in Brunswick, so very small numbers of sites. We'll be monitoring, obviously, the length of stay via the website, because they will have to actually book online, and we'll record all their details as far as their registration numbers and all the rest of it. And the point in that is also so that we can start getting the data that we need to demonstrate whether or not this is of economic value to the region or not. So that record there is going to be really critical for us, having a look at that data and just assessing whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing for the community. The other thing that we need to remember is that, we are talking about reporting back to council in 6 months' time. So we're hoping to collect this data and bring you a report back in 6 months' time, and at that point council can decide, look, we're not going ahead. The data demonstrates that it's going to be too expensive, the monitoring side of it might be too expensive, or the economic benefits are too great, we must invest some more, and I'm sure Hayden would love to have another ranger on board. So has that answered that question?
Well and truly.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Burgoyne.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is something I've followed and supported for quite some time. So I've got a few things in the back of my head about it. One of which was, although I didn't attend this year's local government conference, the year before I did spend quite a bit of time talking to the lady from the RV stand. And I was under the impression, which may have changed since then, but I was under the impression there was quite a bit of money from that side that had been set aside for them to support signage and getting areas up and running. And I'm just wondering whether that had been explored or not.
Yeah, so that's the Caravan Motorhome Association, I think we're talking about here. And there is some funding that is available. They will, once you have actually applied to become an RV-friendly town, they will provide signage. They also can provide some funds towards, well, actually they do actually provide a dump point. And obviously there's the installation side of things that we need to consider in the longer term, and also the ongoing servicing and the connection. I think, Rick, you were saying the connection of water to those dump points is obviously the cost. It's great to get a free dump point, but at the end of this, at the end of the day, we've got to connect it to water, and there's those things to consider as well. So they are there. At this point, we're only talking about a trial, so we need to test the water first before, excuse the pun, we need to test the water first before we actually go and get some of that funding, because the trial, could be knocked on the head. So, yeah. Does that answer that question?
Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Mr. President. Trish, just have a question surrounding the location for Australind, bearing in mind the pending works on the walkway there. So, do we risk it putting that site up and running with it for 6 months or 12 months? Or was there in the community consultation any other areas that we could use in this trial period so that we don't have to, halfway through, relocate the site?
So Christina Reserve and obviously the Elbow were the other 2 sites that came up quite a bit. Obviously, council had some concerns previously about the fact that there's a playground there and there's a lot of activity there. So that is something that is a real consideration. The Elbow had some concerns from the community because it's close to family homes, and they were a little bit concerned that it was tucked away a little bit and therefore could attract that kind of those types of people that might behave inappropriately. So they were the two sites that were kind of mentioned. There was a fourth one which was mentioned by I think 2 people, and that was down, I'm not sure what it's. Yes, thank you. That's the one. Yeah, so that is the other one. That's pretty well set up when you look at it there already. It's got, you know, it's obviously got the bitumen there. It's closed off. It's a nice little place to park your van. So that was the other consideration. Yeah. It would be a shame not to see there be this opportunity in Australind, though. I'd hate to say we're not doing anything.
I agree with that. So my question is, do we amend it to the Collie Bridge, if you obviously had a look at that site to see whether, you know, that would be suitable, as opposed to, I like this estuary location, but I think that with the pending works on the walkway there, you know, we're going to have to maybe move it. So let's make that decision now for the trial purposes and have it at Collie Bridge.
Totally support what council would recommend.
Thank you.
Councillor Lovett.
Thank you, Mr. President. With this, have we looked at long term? Are these sites big enough? The reason I'm asking that is because I went past the one in Kalgoorlie on Sunday morning, and there was a number of coffee vans and food vans, and they were running a community market. And there was around about 60 vans, and that has become normal. It's between 40 and 60 vans there every weekend, because they have similar issues to us, that the caravan parks are full of permanent residents rather than transient. So I guess that's my question is, have the sites that we've chosen for the trial got the capacity to grow to become that community facility of markets and coffees and foods long term? Because it's a great way of having visitors interact and get to know it.
Through Mr. Chair, look, to be perfectly honest, I don't think they are. If we were to become that successful, I think we would have to do a completely start afresh in terms of which sites we would be selecting. But to go to that scale, I don't think any of the sites that we've recommended could accommodate it. Possibly because we may not have them, but otherwise, on a deliberate sort of scale, we don't want to go that fast, that quick. We want to make sure that it's actually small, contained, and we do it in small steps and get it right on the way through.
Thanks, Mr. President. Just got a question for Trish. So with the trial period coming up, for the trial to be successful, we need to let everyone know in the wider caravan community. So what and how do we do that? What's your plan?
Yes. So the communications plan includes obviously leveraging the likes of the the various caravan and camping associations. There are significant websites that are kind of like, I think there's like a wiki camps kind of version for RV travellers. That the word of mouth spreads pretty quickly. That kind of demographic's very good on the old iPad and emails and all the rest of it, and obviously through our other social media outlets as well. So yeah, we've got a whole comms plan in place to back it, because if you don't promote it, it's not going to be successful.
That's right. And
you've got to promote it
to be successful. And
yeah,
that's why I asked the question, but well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Coleman.
Thank you. Just a couple of queries. Some of the issues that we have in the Shire at the moment are rubbish collection, particularly along main roads and other places that stuff's being dumped. So I think, do we have in place greater rubbish collection schedules rather than the normal, because that'll be a peak capacity, even along Southwest Highway and others that's not our jurisdiction. There is always overflowing rubbish, and that's an issue. And just to query that, in doing some other research, are you aware that Deepore are now going back to a charging model because the costs were too high? And similarly, many others along the coast of Western Australia are all going back from free to a charging model, A, to protect their businesses in the local area, but also to cover the costs, because there is significant disruption, and it just moves the cost from the visitor to the ratepayer in effect.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes on the rubbish side of things. So when we talk about main roads, I'm aware that obviously main roads, provide the bins, and we obviously service that. So, the points that we're talking about, having the RV vans isn't on those main roads. It's Snell's Park, so that's in our current kind of smaller footprint. On the charging aspect, that's a really delicate area, because we have to consider our local businesses, and you start charging for something. I agree that I think monitoring the trial, seeing how much it's actually going to cost the Shire, is the important part of this process. It's really understanding what is the real cost to the Shire, and therefore, if it is cost prohibitive, you either choose to charge or you just can the whole thing, depending on what the economic impact, positive or negative, is. So we need to assess all of that within the first 6 months to go down the path. I'm always a little bit wary about the whole charging model, because I think that kind of puts us, and this is probably a personal thing, puts us up against our caravan park owners, and I think we'd probably get a lot of backlash from them if we went down that path. But Simon, I don't know if you want to say anything about that. Thank you.
Look, just a question, a comment on the Collie River side down there. Very, very acute angle of the access to get out. You can get in easily heading south, but getting out would be quite dangerous, especially for some large vehicles. I don't think they'll even make it. And then obviously you wouldn't be able to head north because you have to cut into that median, and there's just not enough manoeuvrability.
Or you go over the bridge around the roundabout.
Yeah, but trying to get out of that access and turn left.
Yeah.
Very dangerous. In fact, I don't think some of the larger vehicles would even make it.
Yeah. Well, I suppose thank you. And I suppose it's then if we have some sort of idea on the timeline for that. The restoration work on the walkway. Yes. Really, if we could, if they're going to start in 6 months' time, then to me it's of no value putting the RV trial there.
Look, and I agree. There's going to be a temporary boardwalk there, or sort of area that they can cart material. So there'll be another intersection that they'd have to create further to the north from the existing entrance. They're also looking at a lay-down area for their materials and all that. So yeah, it will adversely affect that site while that works in progress. And we don't know when they're going to start. There's some issues they have to work through, original issues and approvals.
Okay, any other further questions? Okay, thanks Trish.
Thank you.
Item 5.3.5, review of local planning policies, outbuildings. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I suppose I just want to start with a statement that I find this particular issue regarding the size of outbuildings probably one of the biggest issues that councillors have to deal with. And I have a long-standing issue in Australind. So my first question is surrounding the definitions. Can the definition for domestic use in the policy be included as part of the definitions? Because I believe we must clearly define what domestic use is. So I'm just interested if, Mr. Hall, if that's possible. So it can be more succinct than just domestic use that can be opened up to a lot of interpretation.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Look, happy to include a definition. It would use probably some wording similar to the following in terms that a domestic use relates to hobbies, personal storage or household duties, and not commercial. So they would be the sort of the succinct wording that we would try and use. Happy to include a definition within the draft policy.
I have a follow-up question, if I may, Mr. President, and it's just regarding in paragraph 2C of the policy, it refers to the proposal has been advertised to those landowners that are impacted. So my question was, what do you actually mean by advertising? And could we consider that the impacted landowners are actually notified in writing as opposed to advertising?
Again, through Mr. Chairman, because this application represents an ARCO variation, we are actually, the method in which we advertise is actually at our discretion. But based on the discussions, we sometimes never just ring them up. We sometimes email them or put it in writing. But we generally provide written advice and provide a plan and seek advice within 14 days. Now, to clarify that or to put some certainty back into the definition, the current wording in terms of Part C, which says where the local government has determined that adjoining land may be impacted, the proposal has been advertised. We're happy to insert some further wording that basically, or doesn't basically, it actually says, if advertising to adjoining landowners is required to be carried out by the local government, a letter shall be sent to the landowners and or occupants, giving notice to the variation of the policy requirements, and comments are sought specifically for a period responding within 14 days. So happy to actually include that to make it very overt that we are, as an administration, required to write and wait that 14-day period.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. And my last question, and I suppose I seek guidance on this one, is surrounding the installation of hoists in residential areas. And is there an appetite to me, the installation of a hoist to do services on your vehicle is not a domestic use. It's a nice to have, but I don't consider that as a domestic use as such. And I have seen cases where it's actually used for commercial uses as well. So my concern, I suppose, is the installation of hoists in residential area, or particularly on the smaller residential areas. And can we address that in any way, shape or form moving forward in with this policy?
Through Mr. Chair. Sort of out of my league here because I actually have no idea how to service a vehicle. So I do get the constant argument from people that are hobbyists, that are vehicle enthusiasts, that is their hobby. And I've got a hoist for my bike. I've got all sorts of things and stuff, my push bike and stuff. So why is my hobby and my scale of personal activity any different from someone else's? And I suppose that's where the discretion comes in, that there is the risk that a hoist could be used for commercial purposes, but there's also a risk that it's never going to be used for commercial purposes, and that's what that person wants to do as a hobby to save money, or they're an enthusiast. So the only way to actually address that particular matter, you couldn't put it in there to say that a hoist is only to be used for domestic purposes. If you're concerned that it's going to be used for something else, that's a compliance matter. If you want to stop it completely, you would say that no hoists are allowed. Then you would have that argument, why is my hobby not supported and others are? So I sort of answered, but also threw a question back at you, so sorry for that.
Well, I find that the issues surrounding, wanting to extend the height of the shed in a residential area, most of the time they're because they want to install a hoist.
Yeah, you have overheight boats, overheight caravans as well. So there are a number of reasons why, but that is a more than common request for the hoist. Yeah.
I've lost the battle, but I...
No, it's a discussion.
Got
Got another week, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you.
Councillor
I'll
Coleman.
on it.
Thank you. I don't think you've lost the battle, but just to clarify, I've got many friends that have got far taller sheds than I for their caravans and their boats and their RVs. Our shed does have a hoist. I have a very low 1937 historic car that you can't get under and service if you don't have a hoist to get it off the ground. So we have a hoist for our own hobby purposes, but I could walk around anywhere in Harvey or Australand and find truckloads of sheds taller than the one that I've got. You know, it is definitely a hobby. So I think I hear your point about hoists, but certainly the majority of people, as Mr. Hall said, have got either motorbikes or classic cars that need to service them, and the height of the sheds would be better addressed by caravans and RVs.
Councillor Burgoyne, did you have a question?
No, I was probably going to make a statement. When I thought about it, I was actually going to be arguing the point. So, Councillor Coleman's probably put it more succinctly than I have.
Okay, well, you can share the fine.
Yeah.
Any other questions, councillor? Okay, item 5.3.6, Harvey Men's Shed. A question from Councillor Beach.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like an explanation, or could staff expand on the statement within the report that says, with that in mind, a less financial driven outcome is recommended, and this is the bit I really want to have a chat about, and the departure from the traditional peppercorn lease is considered appropriate to avoid future drains on Shire funds to maintain assets. Now, I guess that now ties back to that discussion we had this afternoon. I didn't know that was happening when I wrote that, but nonetheless, I'd still like a response to my question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is clearly in there to generate that discussion about what we do with community-based leases, as to whether or not there needs to be a degree of commercialisation of them. That doesn't mean you take a peppercorn lease of $1 a year and make it $1,000 or $2,000 a year. It's to actually, on a case-by-case basis, start to have a look at whether or not that is a sustainable model going forward. So it's a general comment that I think will apply more and more often to this discussion about allowing community organisations to use our facilities. So we're not advocating that it has to happen, we just want that in there to generate this discussion.
Yes, and a good point. However, is this likely to be retrospective if we go down this commercial path?
I would find it difficult to impose anything retrospective, but we would be, correct me if I'm wrong, Manager for Governance, if a new lease came up, we would take the opportunity to have that discussion. We wouldn't at that time when that lease is normally up for renewal.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brodden.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President, through you, Mr. Hall. It was interesting in your comment there, we go on a case-by-case basis. If you come back to the sheds we just talked about and people's hobbies, why would we treat one group differently to another? I mean, if I'm in a group down here in Australia, then you're going to charge me, and then you're not going to charge a group in Treendale for a similar facility. Wouldn't that be seen as being unfair?
Through Mr. Chair, I suppose we need to be clear on sort of what we're discussing, where the comments are going, because we do have some community organisations that have the capacity to generate a significant income and aren't paying anything, so that needs to be sort of rational. You also have some community organisations with no capacity to pay, but they might be on a membership basis, so do you actually secure some funds? We don't need cash flow for council. Whether or not the outcome is that monies are set aside in the reserve account so that maintenance of that facility can occur. It would also be unrealistic to set a blanket financial cost or scenario. So we do need to have that discussion, but I think to start with, on an individual basis, we need to start to understand what we've got and how we can actually achieve equity and consistency across the whole organised across the whole shop.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. I'm interested about the Southwest Community Care. My understanding is that they're at Amana Inn, or the old Amana Inn. Am I talking about the right organisation? And they want to relocate, and because this would be a bigger footprint if they were to co-locate with the men's shed. So I'm just wondering how that has evolved and how did the two organisations merge into this report as such?
Through Mr. Chair, I will hopefully paraphrase appropriately from our discussions from one of the applicants. So at the moment we have received a request from the Men's Shed Association. That's why the resolution relates specifically to them doing a business case. It also provides the opportunity to authorise a CEO for us to go and talk to them. At the moment, yes, they are homeless. They are no longer up at the Harvey Ag School. They are temporarily using the Amana Inn, and they would like to stay. There is clear demand for them to stay within the Harvey Townsite. It's purely who's involved. There are synergies with those that are on the Harvey Men's Shed board and those that are involved with some Southwest Community Care. So there's a knowledge base between those two organisations, and through general discussions say, hey, look, you guys are applying for some land, we need something, can we have a chat and see if there's some synergies there? So that is entirely how it's come about, but we don't want to make any formal decisions on Southwest Community Care, but in this application we're just authorising the CEO to go and have a discussion to see whether there's any merit in some form of combined thing, and if so, we would have to change the way we do it and bring everything back to council anyway.
Councillor Coleman.
Thank you. Whilst I agree in principle with your thought process about community groups in the future having the capacity to pay appropriately, may I request that that line that says with that in mind, that paragraph, be withdrawn from this proposal, simply because it's not appropriate to any of the current men's sheds or community groups, and perhaps should be included in future planning through council, that we look at all of the community groups at that time.
Through Mr. Chair, look, guided by council in regard to it, that is actually, that statement is not reflected in the officer's recommendation in any way at all, so it's not something that would, by yourselves supporting the officer's recommendation, you're not giving us that licence to actually go and start that process. It's purely in there to start that debate. So,
any other questions, councillors? Okay, item number 5.3.7, Reserve 17456, Load Road, request for freehold tenure. Councillor Beach.
Yeah, just a little bit of history behind this, Mr. President. The applicant approached the Shire some time ago and he wanted to conduct some small events there, social events. And in fact, I think he was doing it at the time. It was sort of campfire type entertainment, singing type stuff, and some weddings. And people camp there. So my question is, removing the camping element may restrict this location from developing for a small event venue. Is staff open to reconsidering this condition?
Through Mr. Chair, just probably a point of clarification. So the parcel of land in the application that Councillor Beach is referring to is immediately adjoining. Yes, it started without the approvals of council, and yes, we've received an application to amend, well actually no, it was a development application to actually put in a reception centre. That site, in our opinion, has the capacity to accommodate for that use, but they chose to withdraw the application for their own reasoning. In this particular case, Reserve 17456, in our opinion, isn't required to actually allow that reception centre or anything to go ahead, and I don't think it would be in our interest to have what has been historically a very well maintained property to actually allow for a use that they've never happened and potentially damage some of the other requirements of it, which is for Indigenous heritage vegetation protection. So I would prefer to see that come out to protect the original intent of that land.
Thank you.
If you want to take it out, you're allowed to move a motion to do so.
No, just some context behind the reason.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.4, corporate services. 5.4.1, financial statement as at 31st of October 2022. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Campbell.
I'd like to keep Mr Winter, see if he's awake. Mr Winter, are you happy with the rate collection at this stage?
Quite surprised that our rate collection has been so good. It's not that dissimilar from previous years, so pleasantly surprised. And as we've reported in there, 69%. Normally the discount date or due date, we're around that, and a month in, very similar. So thank you for your question.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item number 5.4.2, list of accounts paid October 2022. Any questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.5, community and lifestyle. 5.5.1, Harvey Skate Park concept plan. Councillor Beach.
Yeah, thank you. It seems to be progressing quite well. The only thing I did note that there's no provision for toilets at this particular stage. Now, whilst the pool is open, they probably would be able to access those toilets. But what provisions being made between April and October when the pool's closed?
Yeah, I can answer that one, councillor. Yeah, look, basically we've had a look at the toilets. Obviously, as you say, while the pool's functioning, it's a possibility. However, what's to stop people just going and using the pool? So that's an issue. But we do have funding earmarked from the Local Road Community Infrastructure Program, Phase 3A, which funding becomes available in June 2023. And there's some funding allocated there for some facilities for toilets, rubbish bins, drinking fountains and the like. So yeah, once that funding becomes available, obviously that's something we need to look at, and that's part of the report on to guide the development of the skate park that was identified in that, and we've identified a funding source.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr President, can I also add that that is included in the Shire's budget, so it's not something that you're not aware of?
It won't be in the budget, but I'm not aware of it.
That's a double fine for only up for that one. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.5.2, Australia Day Awards. No questions? Goodbye, Mr Jones.
No, Mr President, I don't have a question, but I just want council to acknowledge that the nominations were of a very high standard this year. So well done to the staff for the advertising or whatever, but it was very competitive and they were of a very high standard. So it wasn't an easy decision by the committee or the advising group. Thank you.
And I think that touches on a point that highlights what a great community and what people that go unnoticed behind the scenes. So, okay, item 6, notice of motion for the following meeting. So Councillor Caponi requests that the following notice of motion be placed in the ordinary council meeting agenda for 22nd of November 2022. That council engage with the Shire of Dardanup to gauge whether they would be interested in amalgamation of the two shires. If so, to negotiate employing an independent consultant to look at the business case and report back to both councils. A very comprehensive report there, so I'm sure Councillor Cavani has read that and is over the moon with that report, so well done on that.
Councillors, I also wanted to let you know that we do have another notice of motion of which due notice has been given from Councillor Capagrego, and that will be included in the council agenda with officers' comments, just noting.
So that's request that the following notice of motion be placed in the ordinary council meeting for 22nd of November 2022, that council advertise an expression of interest within the Shire of Harvey for the purpose of gaining information to assess if there is a need for development of independent living facilities, lifestyle villages within the Shire. So look forward to that report coming through. So for all the Richie Benno supporters out there, there's a lot of twos in that, so we look forward to the council meeting. Okay, item 7, matters behind closed doors. We will be discussing item 5.1, CEO's performance appraisal. Thank everyone. Okay, as there is no more further business to discuss, I will declare the agenda briefing session closed at 5:21. Thank everyone for their attendance and enjoy the rest of the week.